Good evening. My name is Mrs. Cheney. I am a 6th grade teacher at Naples Classical Academy. This is an introduction to well-ordered language, our grammar curriculum. I am making this because we have several students joining us in our second quarter who have not joined us for the beginning of well-ordered language. So this is an overview of some of our basic concepts. Please feel free to rewatch this if you need to review, but it's good practice irregardless of where you're at with well-ordered language. So our first chapter in well-ordered language talks to us about the 4 kinds of sentences. There are 4 kinds of sentences. Declarative sentences, these make a statement. For example, the cat sat. It is simply telling us a fact. The second type of sentence is the interrogative sentence. It asks a question. Did we feed the cat? When I think of interrogative, I like to think of the word interrogate. I am interrogating someone. I'm asking questions. The third kind of sentence is the imperative sentence. It gives a command. Feed the cat. Not every imperative sentence has a subject, but rather the subject is implied. When I say feed the cat, I am giving a command to you to feed the cat. So always keep in mind that imperative sentence may have an implied subject, you. Exclamatory sentences express strong feelings. I love cats! Exclamation point. We want to exclaim with our exclamation point our strong feelings about the subject. Every sentence has subjects and predicates. The subject is what the sentence is about, and the predicate is about the subject. So for the example, we have 2 sentences here. Winds were roaring. What is the subject of the first sentence? Winds. Were roaring tells us about our subject, winds. Our second sentence, the cat sat. Who or what is doing the action? Cat. That would be our subject. And then sat would be our predicate because it is the action or doing or telling us what the subject is about. Now, when we are in well-ordered language, we are always analyzing sentences. So when I analyze a sentence, I simply mark parts of the sentence to tell us what we're doing. So let's go back to our first sentence. Winds were roaring. Winds is my subject. Oh, let me get a pen. Winds is my subject, so I underline it once and I write an S above it. That tells me that this is the subject of the sentence. Were roaring. Both of these are the verb. So I double underline both of these words. Roaring is a predicate verb. We will talk about that in a minute. So I write PV over roaring. And were is actually a helping verb. Helping verbs help the verb out. If I didn't have them, winds roaring would be a very confusing sentence. Helping verbs help my verb out. I write HV over were. Exercises for this can be found on page 16 of Well-Ordered Language 3A. The second sentence, the cat sat. Cat is my subject. I underline it once and I write an S above it. What did the cat do? The cat sat. So I double underline and I write PV, predicate verb. Now the only difference here is that the is not the subject, nor is it a verb, but is actually describing my subject. It is, if it modifies a noun or a pronoun, it is an adjective. So I draw a line straight down and I draw it back up to my subject because it is modifying my subject. And in the little elbow of my subject, my sentence, I write ADJ. This tells me that I am modifying cat with an adjective, the. Chapter 1 also talks about adjectives and adverbs. Now, adjectives modify nouns and pronouns, and they answer the questions how many, whose, which one, or what kind. I prompt these questions in class, so if you're not certain, it will become more and more intuitive as we keep doing these sentences together. But let's look at this sentence. The 2 happy boys jumped. We first have to identify the subject of the sentence. the first subject is, or the only subject, excuse me, is boys. These are the this is the thing that is doing the action. Well, what did the boys do? What did the boys do? They jumped. So we double underline our predicate verb, because predicate verbs are action verbs. And we write PV. PV over the top. Okay, now what kind of boys are these? Notice I use my question, what kind? Well, they're happy boys. So they modify. How many boys are there? Well, there are 2 boys. Which boys? The boys. All 3 of these words are adjectives because they modify a noun, boys. I would write in all the corners ADJ. Forgive my mouse. Now I'd write this in all 3 corners, but for the sake of time, we're going to move on. Adverbs, they modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs, and they answer the questions how, when, or where. So looking at the sentence, happily the boys ran outside. The subject of the sentence, once again, is boys. That's my subject. What do? They ran. Double underline, PV for predicate verb. Where did they run? Notice that I've used the word or the question where. Well, they ran outside. So this tells you more about the verb ran. And in the corner, I write ADV. ADV for adverb. And then how did they run? Well, they happily ran. So I would connect these 2 together to be an adverb. ADV. And which boys? Okay, well, now we're going back to our adjectives. The boys. Draw my arrow. ADJ for adjective. So now that we've talked about subjects and predicates, we need to talk about types of verbs, because these types of verbs help us identify other parts of the sentences. So the first and most common type of verb is the predicate verb. Now, when I tell students about predicate verbs, most of them kind of get a little bit worried. It's a very large word. What is a predicate verb? That doesn't really sound intuitive. But really, all it is a verb in the predicate. And it is always an action verb. So this is the most basic kind of verb that we can find. Common ones are jump, play, sing, go, look. They're always expressive. Verbs express action or a state of being. So predicate verbs are the action verbs. Helping verbs, I talked about them on a prior slide. Helping verbs help predicate verbs. Some common ones are am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been, has, had, do, did, does, may, might, must, should, would, could, shall, will, and can. A full list of those can be found on page 11 of Well-Ordered Language 3A. Besides predicate verbs and helping verbs, we also have linking verbs. I will talk about those more in depth in another slide, but basically they link or join together the subject to more information. But I'm going to pause that discussion for a later slide. Predicate verbs are action verbs, as we just explained, and action verbs can take something called a direct object. A direct object is an objective element that tells us what the verb is acting on. So in the sentence, the boy kicked the ball, the subject of the sentence is boy, so we underline it once, and we've drawn an S above it. What did the boy do? He kicked. This is a predicate verb because it is an action verb, so we write PV over kicked. And now we get to ask the question, what did the boy kick? Well, he kicked the ball, so we draw a circle. And we write DO. And then to finish the sentence, all we have to do is figure out what all of these other modifying words are. And in this sentence, it's very straightforward. The is an article that will always be an adjective. Which boy? The boy. ADJ. Which ball? The ball. ADJ. Okay, so in well-ordered language, we both analyze sentences and we diagram sentences. So analyzing has been that process where we underline and mark above the words subjects and predicates and direct objects and adjectives and adverbs. And that's all wonderful and great. But we also have diagramming, where we take that sentence apart and we put it into special boxes. So the most basic form of this is subject and predicate. So the subject will always go in this first box right here, and the predicate will always go in the second box with a line straight down. Now this changes when we have a direct object. We have 3 boxes now. Subject goes in the first box, line straight down all the way through the line. And then we have our predicate verb, our action verb, in the second box, just like we did. But this time we're going to have one line down, but not all the way through, and we put our direct object there. So going back to the sentence on the prior slide, we have predicate, the sentence was, the boy kicked the ball. In our first box, we would write boy. And this would be on the line. It would not be above. So boy, and what did the boy do? Well, we put kicked in this next box. And I don't have time to write the whole word out, but kicked would go there. And then what did he kick? Ball. Ball would go in that last box. Now where do all our modifiers go? Well, underneath on slanted lines, you would draw down below, you would put the modifiers. The boy kicked the ball. And exercises for this concept can be found in chapter 2 on page, I think, 40. Let me double check that. And all explanations for everything that I'm talking about in this PowerPoint can be found in Well-Ordered Language 3A for the students. Yes, so an exercise of this could be found on page 40, and I highly recommend going through that. Chapter 2 continues with an explanation of predicate nominatives. A predicate nominative is a noun or a pronoun that renames the subject, and we talk about this all the time in class, so this is an important concept to pay attention to. It always follows after a linking verb. Linking verbs, the most common, are the be verbs. These are am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. So let's take a look at the 2 sentences below. The cat is a feline. The subject of this sentence is cat. So I underline it once and I put an S above it. Now this time there is not an action verb. There is no action, but instead there is a linking verb. So linking together cat to feline is the word is. So I double underline my linking verb, and this time I put LV above my linking verb to tell the person reading that this is a linking verb. Now, what is it linking us to? Well, it is linking us to the word feline. Feline, in fact, renames the subject. Is the cat a feline? Is the feline a cat? Correct. Yes, it is. So we write predicate P in, predicate nominative. It renames the subject. A way to remember that is nominative comes from the Latin word nomen, which means name. So it's a predicate nominative. It renames the subject. To diagram, well, actually, let's take a look at the second sentence. We'll talk about diagramming these in a minute. The statue is a stone pillar. The subject is statue. We underline it. We put an S above it. It is, I see that I have a linking verb, LV. Well, what is it? It's a pillar. So I write P in for predicate nominative. Now, what kind of pillar is it? Well, it's a stone pillar. So if it modifies a noun, because predicate nominatives are nouns, it's an adjective. Which statue? The statue. Another adjective, ADJ. And then a pillar. This also connects to pillar, so it's another adjective. Now, when I diagram predicate nominatives, instead of a straight up and down line like I had for the direct objects, I have a slanted line. And I tell students a way to remember this is that my slanted line is going to create an arrow that points us back all the way to the subject because it's renaming that subject. So if I was to do this again with the sentences on the previous slide, it would be the cat would go here, the cat is a feline. The cat. The cat is a feline. Very closely related to predicate nominatives are predicate adjectives. A predicate adjective is an adjective that describes the quality of the subject. They also always follow after a linking verb, which is why it is important to memorize those be verbs. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. So taking a look at the sentences below, the book was dusty. The subject of the sentence is book. We underline it once and we draw an S above it. The book was. Was is our linking verb. LV. What was it? Well, it was dusty. Well, dusty doesn't rename the subject because it's not a noun. The book isn't a dusty. It's not a noun. But it is describing the quality of the subject. It's dusty. So instead of this time, I'm going to write PA for predicate adjective. Which book? The book. I would write ADJ in the corner there. Going on to the second sentence, the athlete might be hurt. The subject of the sentence is athlete. I underline it once and put an S above it. Now this time I have two verbs, might be. Now typically, might acts as a helping verb, but because helping verbs only help predicate verbs, these together become both linking verbs. It's considered a linking verb phrase. So I'll put LV above both. Be is that main linking verb. And then what might the athlete be? Well, the athlete might be hurt. Hurt is describing how the athlete is existing. Well, might be hurt. This would be, once again, a predicate adjective. It can't be a predicate nominative because the athlete can't be a hurt. Hurt is not a noun, but it is describing the quality of the subject. The athlete. Put ADJ in the corner there. Diagramming predicate adjectives is very similar to diagramming predicate nominatives. In the subject box, you have the subject and the line, then a linking verb, and then just like predicate nominatives, a slanted line right here. That slanted line, just like that predicate nominative, I tell students to think about it like an arrow pointing back to the subject. So going back to that first sentence, the book was dusty. Book would go in my first box. In my second box, was is my linking verb. And then what might the book be? Sorry, the book was what? Dusty. And all this would be directly on the line, if not for the text already there. And then which book? That book. And always, when you are doing diagramming, keep any word that was capitalized in the original sentence capitalized in your diagram. So the start of the sentence on the first page was the. The needs to remain capitalized in my diagram. Okay, with that said, you are on your way to grammar success. This was an overview of chapters 1 and 2 of Well-Ordered Language. I hope you found it helpful. Please feel free to reach out to me if you are still struggling on any of these ideas, and I'm happy to help. I will be making more of these presentations as we go. I think they're helpful for review, and I hope that you found it helpful as well. But again, let me know if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. Have a good evening.